You can't hurt me.
So Assassin's Creed Shadows comes out in a little under 2 months now, and I got to play 4 hours of the game in a work-in-progress build. I know I haven't been talking about this game much lately, I've just needed a bit of a break from Assassin's Creed, and the marketing has also just been dead for it. I assume that will start ramping up as we get closer to March 20th, but I wanted to share my first impressions of the game with you guys in the 4 hours I played. Obviously, my general opinion on the game isn't definitive yet. This is a big RPG, and what I played only scratches the surface. I played Yasuke and Naoi's prologue and introductory missions that set up the story and gameplay tutorials, and then I jumped to a main questline that takes place later into the game. I can't show any footage from the prologue or the Animus Hub Launcher, which I did get to use, but all the footage from the later section in Harima, one of the game's provinces, is all mine. I'll start by saying, while there are a fair bit of changes from the previous games, this still generally feels like the other AC RPG games. So that's good news or bad, depending on what you play Assassin's Creed for. Ubisoft has said several times now that they're making Assassin's Creed games for different audiences within the community. I mean, even the CEO of the company himself said this. So if you liked Odyssey or Valhalla, and to an extent Origins, though this feels more like Odyssey and Valhalla to me, just in terms of gameplay and design, then this game is more for you than, say, somebody who only wants a return to roots, old school AC game. Though, from what I played, I do believe the stealth is a step up from the other RPG games, but I'll get into that later. I want to start by talking about the Animus Hub Launcher that we've known about for a long time now, ever since it was announced as Infinity. Finally got to see it, though I can't show my own footage of it. It's pretty much exactly what we thought it was, this Animus-style hub launcher for the games, where you can select what game you want to play. Although, when I was using it, it only showed Shadows, Mirage, Valhalla, Odyssey, and Origins. None of the games prior to Origins were accessible on the hub. I'm not sure if it was just like that for my preview build, or that's how it will be when it fully releases, but I thought that was kinda strange. As for the hub itself though, I didn't really get to spend too much time on it. I basically just had to launch the game, but I know there's going to be a little more to do in it than just a glorified launch menu. That said though, the aesthetic is cool, and it did feel quite similar to the little Animus mission selection screen at the start of Unity. I really like when the series leans into the Animus elements more. That's something the original Assassin's Creed did a lot of, from its menus to even the in-game HUD. But for some reason, slowly over time, those little Animus flourishes started to get phased out, but it's more present in Shadows. The in-game HUD and map are in this kind of Animus style. You even got the Abstergo logo in the corner, it pops up during loading screens. They're small things, but I like it. It's part of what makes Assassin's Creed such a fun and unique blend of history and sci-fi, having this futuristic, digital design contrasted against a historical setting. I did get to see a little of the modern day, not much though, and I don't want to spoil anything. It was very creepy and ominous, as the modern day can often be. I'm still not really sure what direction they're taking the modern day in this game. It felt very mysterious. Valhalla's modern day ended on a good cliffhanger that I'd like to see continued, but I'm not sure if it's going to be in this game. I saw such a small snippet of it, it's impossible to know for sure. Hopefully there's a lot more to the modern day than what I saw though. I've always been of the belief that modern day is essential to Assassin's Creed, so I'm not thrilled about it continuously being pushed to the background for like 95%, or in the case of Mirage, the entirety of the game. So hopefully there's a lot more to it than what I saw. As for Shadows' main narrative, I don't have much to say about it yet, since I only saw Naoe and Yasuke's prologue, and then a storyline much further into the game, so I kinda had to piece together the context for that, as I had basically no idea what happened in between. It was like skipping from chapter 1 of a book to chapter 5 or 6. There was an option called Canon Mode when I was launching the game. It was described as this option you could turn on that would remove the ability to make choices in the story and automatically follow the canon events of the story. So if you want the canon version of the story, you can turn that on. I've never seen an option like this in an RPG game before. Maybe other games have done it, I'm not sure. It's a cool option to have. I don't think I'll use it personally. Choices are a big part of the narrative that I'd rather not take away, at least on a first playthrough. but it'll be nice to know what the actual definitive canon events of the story are, instead of being left to guess. I did find Naoe's storyline in the prologue to be more interesting for me personally, because that's where all the Assassin's Creed story elements are, as she obviously has a connection to the Creed, so that stuff had me intrigued on where they would take it. And I will say, in the prologue, there were a lot of motion captured cutscenes. I talk about this a lot because cutscene presentation has really regressed in this series since Origins. Mirage and Valhalla barely had any mocap at all, which just made so many of the scenes feel really awkward and lifeless at times. But in the prologue anyway, Shadows had quite a bit. It's still a big RPG that uses procedural generation to animate characters in the less important cutscenes, so I'm not expecting a ton of mocap, but so far it felt like it had more than Mirage and Valhalla, maybe even more than Odyssey as well, but we'll see when the full game comes out. I doubt it's to the same volume of Origins in the older games though. Once out of the prologue, you can switch between Naoe and Yasuke pretty much where or whenever you want, so long as you're not in combat or anything. You just go into the inventory, hold a button, and then a quick loading screen, and you're playing as that character now. It's not as seamless as, say, how Spider-Man 2 did it, but it's pretty quick to switch between them. And then for the main missions I played, it gave me the choice of who to play as very frequently as well. I played as Naoe for the majority of my time, which is probably how I'll play the full game as well. Her skill set is far more in line with how I like to play Assassin's Creed, focusing on stealth and parkour, and even with combat being more challenging with her, I still enjoyed using her moveset. All of her animations have a lot of flair, specifically in stealth and combat. They're very unique and specific to her. We haven't really seen these kinds of moves from any other AC protagonists, just chock full of the exaggerated swagger of a feudal Japan shinobi. And I like playing as that agile, acrobatic shinobi archetype. It feels like the closest I can get to a modern Tenchu game. But I did still play a fair bit as Yasuke too, to test out what his strengths and weaknesses were, and just how doable things like stealth and parkour would be with him. They are indeed possible, but just barely. I mean, he is so slow at parkour, it's really not worth doing. I had to chase someone down in a mission while I was playing as him, and he was so slow, I just had to change to Naoe mid-chase to catch up. In stealth, he can do a brutal assassination. It's basically just using a combat finisher to instantly kill an enemy, and you'll be spotted by anybody nearby when you do it. It's not in the least bit subtle, but it does still have its uses. For example, there was this elite enemy that I couldn't one-shot assassinate as Naoe, and I couldn't kill this guy in combat with her either. He was messing me up. So I switched to Yasuke, and I was actually able to take him out immediately with the brutal assassination, so there are certain situations like that where it can be advantageous to quickly switch characters. But I'll still likely play a majority of the game with Naoe, as again, her gameplay is far more of what you would expect from an Assassin's Creed game. So that brings me to stealth. Stealth with Naoe feels like a step up from the other RPG games, which I realize isn't really saying much, but it certainly has more depth. Compared to some of the best stealth games out there though, it's still not very deep. It's not on the level of something like Metal Gear Solid, Splinter Cell, Hitman, or Dishonored, and of course there's no social stealth this time around either. For tools, you get the kunai and shuriken, which are Naoe's only ranged options, along with the shinobi bells that are used for lures and throwable smoke bombs. And you can quick throw all these tools by selecting it while holding the left trigger and then pressing the right bumper. Not too different from Mirage really when it comes to the tools, although there isn't a tool modification system, but rather just a skill tree dedicated to upgrading and improving your shinobi tools. However, you can summon your allies to assist you in stealth, sort of similar to the old assassin recruit system from Brotherhood to AC3. I've wanted that to return for a long time. It's not exactly the same, you can't just summon a bunch of assassins at once or use something like Aerostorm, but if you aim at an enemy, you can direct your ally to kill them. I had one ally that could be used for stealth, to kill without being seen, which was very useful, and one that would fight in combat. Although it was sometimes a bit difficult to direct my ally to kill the target I was actually aiming at. I'd aim right at or near someone and they would target the wrong enemy entirely, so hopefully that gets sorted and cleaned up a bit before launch. It does appear you can customize the allies and upgrade them further, so I'm looking forward to seeing how strong you can actually make them by the end game. Using light and shadow to hide in the dark is new for the series. It's only viable at night, but it can be quite useful for getting by or sneaking up on guards. It's not as in-depth as the old Splinter Cell games, for example. In those games you had a light meter, and it would show precisely how hidden you were based on how bright or dark the area was, while in Shadows you're either hidden in the dark or you're not, which is portrayed by this little white silhouette, making you effectively invisible so long as you don't get too close. You can extinguish candles or destroy lamps to create more darkness. It's not an absolute game changer, at least in what I played, but it is a nice addition to have, and thinking back, I'm surprised Assassin's Creed hasn't implemented this earlier, considering Ubisoft was doing it in Splinter Cell over 20 years ago. I finally got to test the double assassinations with the Tanto and Hidden Blade combination. I really enjoyed using and having this mechanic back. Syndicate was the last game to have it, almost a decade ago, and yes, you can do double air assassinations as well, like the old games. I was worried it might be really contextual if enemies weren't grouped together in pairs a whole lot, but I had quite a bit of opportunity to use it in the small amount of missions I played. So I think keeping the Tanto and Hidden Blade equipped as one of your weapons is a must for the double assassinations alone. I didn't get to try the rush assassination for the Kusarigama that we've seen in a lot of the official gameplay, as it was much higher on the skill tree than what I could get at that point in the game. It does seem very strong though, so I'm definitely going to use that as well. I feel like the katana has the most limited and underwhelming of the special assassinations, where you can just kill people through a shoji door. That doesn't seem quite as strong or useful as double and rush assassination. And you can only have 2 weapons equipped at a time, so I know which 2 I'm likely using. Proning is obviously new as well. Again, not really a massive game-changing addition. It feels kind of natural to have in Assassin's Creed though. Of course, it's mostly useful for hiding in shorter grass, and I imagine snow. Unfortunately, I didn't get to play in the snow, but you can do some fun movement things with it, like going from a sprint into a dolphin dive, and you can assassinate while in the prone position, so it allows for a little creativity and stealth. Not an earth-shattering change, but felt helpful to have. How you scout areas and tag enemies is quite different from the last few games. Naue has eagle vision, Yasuke does not, obviously since he's not a descendant of the Izu, so he wouldn't have the sixth sense. But enemies will be a more faint shade of red the further they are, or depending on if they're behind a wall. From there you can observe and tag them using the left trigger, as the drone bird we've had since Origins is now gone. I need to play with this some more to have a more concrete opinion on the change, but I think most of us thought the drone bird mechanic was starting to overstay its welcome regardless. Detection felt consistent, no complaints there. You get a pretty forgiving timing window to still assassinate an enemy once you've been detected, allowing for frontal assassinations instead of just immediately putting you into combat. Again, you would hope functioning detection would be a given in any stealth game, but ever since Valhalla's broken detection on launch, I feel the need to make sure every time. Oh, and I almost forgot about the new cover system. I didn't get too much time to play around with it, but it does feel rather similar to Syndicate's, where you just walk up to a corner of a wall or whatever, and it'll automatically stick you into cover, no input needed. It's nice to have a cover system back, even if it is rather simple. Generally though, the stealth with Naue certainly feels like an improvement from the other RPG games. Again, I realize that isn't really saying a whole lot, but as someone who primarily likes to play Assassin's Creed for stealth, they made some solid improvements and additions. Unfortunately, I can't really say the same for Parkour. While Ubisoft Quebec has given Naue some fancy new animations and flips, at its core, Parkour really doesn't feel all that different from the other RPG games mechanically. I will say, Naue's sprinting speed is very fast, which is nice and what you would expect from this extremely agile shinobi. Her sprint is much faster than Yasuke's. They also flipped the crouch and dodge buttons, so ever since Origins, X or square has been dodge, while B and circle has been crouch. Now it's the opposite. It was a little to get used to at first. I kept crouching in the middle of combat, but a positive to this change is you won't be accidentally crouching when trying to hang off of a ledge or jump down while in parkour. This is also useful when using the parkour down mechanic, where if you hold B or circle when approaching a ledge, you can drop down to the nearest and safest surface below you, which gives you a little more control. This was still possible in Valhalla and Mirage, but it does feel improved and more consistent to use in Shadows, especially with the swapping of the buttons. However, when it comes to the rest of the mechanics and what you can actually do in parkour, it feels the same as the last few games. Ejects are still extremely contextual, if you can even find many good opportunities to use them to begin with. Your momentum will sometimes still randomly stop or slow down for seemingly no reason. Some of the flips still have those weird pauses before executing them, and even if there were deeper parkour mechanics, the design of the world, at least in the couple areas I played in, doesn't support the use of it frequently. There's not many parkour paths or highways, and the streets are very wide, with no real way to get from one side to the other without touching the ground. Maybe there are some bigger and denser cities I didn't play in that are slightly better for parkour, but in the limited areas I got to experiment with it in some of the towns and castles, the parkour design was quite lacking. This doesn't really surprise me. It's a vast open world RPG, and like Origins, Odyssey, and Valhalla, there's going to be a lot of open space where parkour is impossible. So even if it was mechanically deeper, there still wouldn't be much opportunity to use it. Which goes to show that world design is just as important for the parkour experience as mechanics. Mirage on a mechanical level was still in large part the same system as the other RPG games, but it did have Baghdad's terrific parkour design to help prop up some of the clunky, shallow parkour mechanics. Some people may not mind, but for the parkour enthusiasts out there who primarily play these games for the parkour, that could be a pretty big deal breaker. And this is now the 5th game to use this parkour system we've had since Origins, the 5th iteration, and yet on a mechanical level, it is still almost as shallow as it was back in Origins, just essentially now with flips and a grappling hook. Yeah, there are flips now, but that's not a new mechanic, it's just a new animation. We're in 2025 and still nowhere close to the level of parkour depth we had back in 2007, which is just frustrating. Again, depending on the kind of player you are and what you play these games for, this may be a small or big deal. Regardless though, parkour is undeniably part of Assassin's Creed's identity and what helps make it so distinct, especially in the old games, so something's gotta improve and change here in the near future. This parkour system we've had since Origins needs to go. Fortunately, at least this hitbox-based combat system we've also had since Origins has seen some improvement. I was actually quite impressed with the combat in the limited time I had with it. Obviously, I know this game is inevitably going to be compared to Ghost of Tsushima and its combat. This is still not close to that level. I mean, I think Ghost of Tsushima has one of the best combat systems of any open world game. But by Assassin's Creed standards, Shadows' combat felt pretty good from what I played. Weapon strikes feel good, they have a lot of impact and weight to them, the feedback of breaking off an enemy's armor is satisfying, and the armor feels like better justification for some of the damage sponge, which was one of my issues with Odyssey's combat. There's a certain rhythm and timing to be learned with the different weapons, and when to use charged light and heavy attacks. I liked how distinct the shinobi and samurai enemy types felt from one another. The shinobi enemies play more like Naue, very agile, running and dodging around, throwing kunai and smoke bombs, just being pesky ninjas, but they're very light on health and armor. While the samurai are of course the opposite, better defense, more armor, deal significant damage with a direct hit. Fighting them felt very different. Then there are the elites who feel like mini-bosses in their own right. They couldn't be instantly assassinated as Naue, though I do believe you can unlock that as a skill in the shinobi tree. They also heal themselves, though one of the times I fought an elite, this got a bit egregious. He healed himself from near death all the way back to full and did that multiple times. I eventually killed him, but that was really annoying to deal with. I hope they tone down how much the elites can heal themselves. That aside, there is some more depth in how enemies attack as well. There's still of course the red unblockable attacks, but there's now flurry attacks too, where you'll be hit with a string of 3 consecutive attacks that must be parried or dodged. As for Naue and Yasuke themselves, they each have 3 weapon types. I got to experiment with all of them. They each have their own skill trees and special abilities, along with Naue and Yasuke having a universal ability slot that can be used no matter what weapon you have equipped. For Yasuke, this was the Spartan kick. I don't know if that's what it's actually called, but that's what I'm calling it. And for Naue, it was this combo of kicks that would knock an enemy over. I was able to unlock this really strong ability called Shadow Barrage for the Tanto and Hidden Blade. Once activated, it will have Naue automatically dodge any attacks directed at her for 20 seconds. It felt too overpowered to me. 20 seconds is a long time to have an auto dodge, and I didn't even have it fully upgraded. That being said, even with that ability, combat was still pretty hard. I wasn't expecting it to be as challenging as it was. I played on normal and died quite a bit, especially as Naue. Obviously, it's easier with Yasuke. His strikes deal more damage, he can absorb more attacks, his parries are more effective at stunning enemies, and he gets 5 heals compared to Naoe's mere 3. But I enjoyed the challenge Naoe's combat presented. It not only incentivizes stealth, as fighting a horde as Naoe was very difficult, especially if each enemy had armor, not to mention some of them have firearms now, so you can be getting sniped from range while in the midst of combat. But she also feels like that glass cannon type of build in combat, where she can deal a lot of damage, but not take much herself. Which is how I typically like the combat to feel in Assassin's Creed, as assassins are more about precision and agility than brute strength and tanking a bunch of hits. Well, excluding Connor. But for those who prefer that, that's what Yasuke is for. Unlike Odyssey, the gameplay isn't really designed around creating builds with different gear and weapons, as the character themselves are the builds. Again, feelings about that may vary. I know a lot of people who liked Odyssey actually really enjoyed having the freedom to create their own builds and fine-tune their stats in a specific way. That's not as much of a thing in Shadows because the character archetypes are already built in a specific way. Naoe for stealth, Yasuke for combat. There's only 2 slots of gear now as well, the torso and headgear, so customizing a very specific build isn't as doable. There are still stats on the weapons and gear of course, and outfits provide perks, but for those who, for example, liked to make a poison ranged build or something specific like that in Odyssey, that's not looking possible here, or at least not to the same extent. The ranged weaponry in general is quite limited. As I mentioned, Naoe only has the kunai and shuriken, and the shuriken isn't really meant to be used as a lethal option, while Yasuke has the teppo gun and a normal bow, which he can use in place of his second weapon slot. You might even be able to use 2 ranged weapons and no melee. I didn't actually test that out, I wish I did. The leveling system has returned to the normal numbered levels like in Origins and Odyssey. That applies to you, your gear, and enemies. Even the territories on the map have levels assigned to them. I was started as level 25, so I'm assuming these missions I played in Harima took place around the early mid-game. However, progression still works a little bit differently than Origins and Odyssey, because now there's also something called knowledge ranks, and you need a certain knowledge rank to unlock a skill that you can then acquire with mastery points. You do this by getting knowledge points, which can be earned by completing some open world activities. For example, one I did was praying at a shrine. It might sound a little confusing, but basically skills are just locked behind knowledge ranks instead of levels now. But you still use skill points, or mastery points as it's called in this game, to acquire the skill itself. I prefer it this way to the power level system they tried to implement in Valhalla, where you had that absolutely massive web of a skill tree where most of the skills would only boost tiny stats. This way the skills feel more substantial. While my time with Shadows' open world was limited, and I was confined to a relatively small part of the overall map, I did manage to stumble upon a couple side activities. I already mentioned the shrines, but there was a lot of opportunity to observe and paint some of the wildlife that could then be used in the settlement. I didn't get to see how the settlement system itself worked though, unfortunately. I tried to find some side quests while I was exploring, as I felt some of the bigger side quest arcs in Odyssey were actually one of the game's biggest strengths, and this being made by the same team, I'm hoping for some similarly high effort, long running side quest arcs. But I did have to stay on the main path if I wanted to complete the main questline in the time I was given, so I didn't find much aside from a quest where this little girl wanted me to avenge the death of her parents by killing 25 Ronin in Harima. This was less of a side story arc though, and more like those contracts from Odyssey where it was either kill 5 sharks around Greece, or kill Spartan hoplites in this specific area, etc. So there's probably more of these types of quests throughout the game. The exploration mode is back from the previous games as well, where it doesn't tell you exactly where your objective is, but instead gives some clues as to its general vicinity. Though it does work a little bit differently now with the scouts, as you can use your available scouts to scan an area of the map, unveiling any quests or objectives nearby. So now you don't have to go over to that area yourself to confirm if that's where the objective is, which makes it easier to locate, especially now that the drone bird is gone, as that's how you used to have to scan for the objective's location. Though, if you'd rather not do that at all, there is still a guided mode, I believe. This focus on less hand-holding in the exploration extends to viewpoints too. As we've known for a while, simply synchronizing at a viewpoint will no longer automatically fill your map in with all the nearby points of interest. Instead, from the viewpoint, you have to use the observe mechanic with the left trigger and manually mark a nearby point of interest you're wanting to go explore. The scouts aren't only used for scanning the map either though. I was able to use them to smuggle some supplies I found in an enemy base, and I was even able to purchase a little hideout in the port of Aga called a kakurega. Here you can manage your scouts, refill supplies, move items into storage, and accept contracts. It's like a little safe house area you can access in towns. I realize now that I didn't actually check what the contracts were. That's my bad, but I'm sure some other creators were able to test that out. I don't have many thoughts on the world itself yet, as again, I only got to see so much. I did experience a season change. This is dynamic, so it happens based on how much time you've been playing in the world, as opposed to preset seasons that change based on where you are in the story, like in a game such as Hogwarts Legacy. Once I played enough in one season, I even had the option to manually change the season on the map screen. You do get this season changing loading screen, so it's not entirely seamless. Again, I really wanted to see what winter looked like, as that's what's going to shake up the landscape the most, but I didn't get to it in my time with the game. The visuals look good, maybe not quite the big jump a lot of people may have been expecting, with this being the first true next-gen AC game. Like, going from Valhalla and Mirage to this is nowhere near the leap it was from Black Flag to Unity in the previous generation. But Unity is a bit of a special case to be fair, because to me there's an argument to be made that it still looks better than most of the recent AC games. I do like the destructible environments though, that made the world feel a little more malleable, and it looks cool, especially in combat. All that said though, while again, I'm going to refrain from giving any conclusive opinion on the game until I get the chance to play a lot more of it, the overall sentiment I got is what I said at the beginning. If you liked the other RPGs, chances are you'll like Shadows too. Possibly more if you're really into stealth and wish that was an area the RPG games were better in. If you didn't like Origins, Odyssey, or Valhalla, and just want the classic formula of an AC game, like the old games or even Mirage, you probably won't like Shadows either, unless again you put a lot of stock into something like stealth that is a genuine improvement from the other RPGs. I might even say the combat is my favorite iteration of the RPG hitbox formula, but I'm not sure if I'll feel the same way after 50 plus hours or however long the game ends up being. Parkour is really still the biggest disappointment, but I'm not surprised. While I initially had hoped that some major changes could be coming to Parkour when we first heard this game would be on a new version of the Anvil engine, that hope was quickly dispersed when we first saw gameplay of it. And I'm sure some of the AC Parkour creators on YouTube will be dissecting some of the issues with it in greater detail. But let me know what you guys think about Shadows based on the gameplay you've seen and your current excitement level. Thank you for being patient with me recently. I know I've been quite inactive and I apologize. But as always, thank you for watching. Thank you to my YouTube and Patreon members for supporting the channel. And I hope you have a good rest of your day, everybody.
Yeah.